No, it's all over. To hell with work when there's less than an hour left until the demise of humanity. Everyone received this notification. Both the mother, worried about the future of her children, clutching them to herself in panic, and the rest of the people. Staring at the screens of their smartphones, they experienced mixed feelings: pain, fear, horror, awe of the unknown. They knew how many people had died trying to save them and realized that they were already doomed. However, one of the heroes stepped onto the floor of the 48th story of the terrifying tower. Around him, tongues of flame blazed scarlet, unbearable heat enveloped the hero, who, however, did not worry too much about it, only gripping his magic blade tighter. Before the hero stood an enraged dragon of terrifying size. The dragon looked down contemptuously at the pitiful man who had come to defeat him. The magical creature delivered its first fiery blow. Tongues of flame and red-hot chains swirled around the hero. The chains ensnared the hero's legs, immobilizing him. The dragon raised its paw over the immobilized target, after which he tried to turn the hero into a wet spot by slamming him to the ground with his paw. But to his surprise, he found nothing under his paw. The hero called out to the dragon from the other side, mocking its obvious plan to crush him. Thus enraging the dragon turned its unbridled rage into a fiery storm in its maw, which he immediately hurled down upon the hero. A magical strike of such power destroyed the entire floor they were on. However, the hero foresaw even this, dodging the dragon's blow by leaping upward. Taking advantage of the moment, the hero began to concentrate his magic in the blade. Determined, he raised his blade above the dragon's maw, and he directed his powerful blow straight into the dragon's eye. It howled in pain. The dragon caught his breath for a second in surprise, to then flare up with renewed fury and acquire supernatural energy. The hero, full of determination, decided not to dodge, but to use a different fighting technique. Gathering his magical powers into a fist and reciting a spell, he created an infinite library with records of skills. Thus he summoned Hellfire in one hand and Black Tears in the other hand, with a magic blade. The floor shakes from the laughter of the dragon, who considers the hero's skills weak and senseless. However, the hero, realizing the deplorable state of his situation, had nevertheless conceived something. He decided to combine these weak magical skills into one. Not knowing whether it would work, he nevertheless began his incantation, and oh miracle, it worked. The energy of the two spells began to mix, and formed a skill of a new rank. The skill summoned a void dragon, which struck the creature the hero was fighting. The hero turned out to be a man named Kang Jin-hyuk, full of confidence in his plan, because it's not the first time he's killing the dragon of this tower. The game Tower of Trolls was extremely difficult. Upon launching it, a huge tower of terrifying appearance soared up in front of the player, its top reaching into the ominous red sky, covered with clouds. Quite a few people have tried to beat this game, taking on the roles of warrior gnomes, knights, and sorceresses. However, after 3 years, they realized that it was impossible to complete the game. The enemies were too strong, the traps were impassable, and the nasty spells discouraged them from playing. And at the sight of the practically invincible guardian of the gates, their hands dropped completely. In the tower, weather challenges awaited them, such as polar temperatures from which no armor could protect them, freezing them in just an hour, or impassable 10-kilometer labyrinths, terrifying in their immensity. Overall, the ratings and interest in the game were rapidly declining, but our hero was one of those who did not give up so easily. He continued to pass through the tower, sweating profusely, and so he reached the top of the tower, conquered the 50th level, having stopped to catch his breath, bleeding and sweating. He could not believe what he was seeing now. Before his eyes flashed everything he had managed to overcome: traps, creatures, treasures. Not believing that he had finally completed the game, he tried to launch a stream using magic. However, an unexpected notification distracted him from it. He found the notification amusing, as it mentioned server updates. But everyone knew that the game was unlikely to have such budgets due to its unpopularity. Having sat down to rest at the top of the tower, he pondered the likelihood of this update, and finally put aside his augmented reality helmet. Because they pay peanuts, it seems to be time to move away from esports. The scattered trash and unwashed plates clearly indicated a lack of me time. A pleasant light breeze was blowing through the window of his room, which was undoubtedly relaxing. Outside the window, the moon was shining, and there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Gene Hack decided to start a stream, boast about his walkthrough, have some beer, and enjoy a hearty dinner. But the thought of ending his esports career gnawed at him. He was about to tell the viewers on the stream about it, but changed his mind, referring to it as a silly joke. He drowned his oppressive thoughts in alcohol and ended up getting drunk. He woke up on a crumpled bed, himself considerably crumpled from a hangover. He had a headache, and in general, his condition left much to be desired. Gene Heck decided to download the tower-ending walkthroughs, so he quickly turned on his computer. However, the unexpected news that popped up on the screen shocked him. The tower had appeared in reality. Numerous streams showed an impregnable tower piercing the twilight sky. People were panicking, writing that this was the very tower from that game. They showed on the stream how the blood-red sky, thickening over the tower, was being enveloped by clouds. Puzzled, Jin Hyuk could not believe his eyes. Such a wrong, such an unlike the rest of the city tower, was visible through the most ordinary multi-story buildings. All residents received the same message. No one could believe at what was happening. Stunned, people saw a message that said they had 90 days to complete the tower. Jin Heck also saw this message. What was happening so shocked him that he stood up, dropping his chair. Cold sweat ran down his face, which was etched with horror. Terrible thoughts tormented him, clearly spoiling his mood. He dashed out of the house as fast as his legs could carry him. He literally jumped over the stairs, so excited was he by the thoughts of the tower's appearance. People were crowding in the street. Each of them was frantically searching for ways to leave for another country. They were fiercely arguing about where to go. And it turned out that such a tower had appeared in every country. Meanwhile, Jin Heck was running at full speed towards that tower, having stopped and clenched his fists. He thought that it was not the time to run away, but the time to fight. The entrance to the tower's special territory was located in Seoul's underground market. After descending there, the hero saw that among the garbage and closed stalls, he was not alone. There were other players too, both grown men and children, and even girls. But they were still newcomers to this game. Gene Heck felt their eyes on him. Suddenly, a young man with a familiar voice called out to him, interrupting his thoughts. In a pressed suit and with a radiant smile, Lee Jong-soo, a local celebrity, appeared before him. He laughed off Gene Heck's caustic comment, and he immediately suggested taking advantage of the situation, which Jin Hyuk was clearly not happy about. Remembering how badly he had treated other streamers who had signed a contract with Jong-soo, Gene Heck was about to leave when his colleague stopped him by the shoulder, causing awkwardness and irritation, from which he immediately received a blow, with his forehead straight to the nose. Bleeding and writhing in pain, he stared ahead in shock. Unable to cope with the overwhelming emotions, he fell to his knees before the irritated Jin Hyuk towering over him. Meanwhile, in the small fountain of the underground market, the water splashed calmly and peacefully. But suddenly, from under this fountain, something began to grow rapidly. Before everyone stood a tree, down which trickled streams of water from what until recently had been a gurgling fountain. Everyone in the market hall became excited and delighted. Jin Hyuk, smiling resolutely, also did not believe that what was happening in front of him was not a dream. Suddenly, red fruits appeared on the tree among the leaves. 4 items, fruits that increase level, dexterity, and other skills. Realizing that there were very few of them, Jin Hyuk prepared himself for the fact that getting them would be far from easy. The rest in the hall were thinking the same thing, so they also prepared to fight. At one point, everyone present in the market basement rushed to the mangrove tree. The fight was furious, with shoves and kicks heard everywhere and tufts of hair flying about. Jong-soo kept trying to persuade Jin Hyuk to work together, but in response he received only contemptuous silence. Spluttering blood, he was already breaking into a scream. However, Jin Hyuk only smiled silently and watched the general commotion, not giving in to provocations. People were climbing the tree with all their might, trying to push away their rivals, and suddenly someone plucked the cherished fruit. Without wasting a second, he immediately bit into the pink-white juicy flesh. For him, this moment froze. He felt his stats increase, but it only emboldened the others. With renewed vigor, even more fiercely, people started a fight over the fruit. Jane Heck was in no hurry to get there at all, standing calmly at a distance. Only a slight smile betrayed that he had a plan. Suddenly, the tree of greed took root in people. Those recoiled in fear, someone even fell from surprise. People in fear rushed away from the tree, running around Jin Hyuk, who was still standing in his place. John Soo stared at it in utter confusion and also wanted to rush away from the tree. But he was stopped by a sarcastic comment about him going to surrender. Angry at such stupidity and fear for himself, he blurted out that he had no plans to die. But Jin Heck seemed to be indifferent to these screams. There were no emotions on his face at all. He knew that the main reward was contained within the tree itself. His confidence made John Soo think about it too. Considering everything that was said, it seems that he believed Jin Heck's words. The smell of quick profit made him squeeze out a smile. Having pulled himself together, he was already intent on a business conversation, developing a plan of action. Jin Haas has expressed his desire to move forward. He pointed his finger somewhere, straight at the tree itself. So they stood facing each other, considering what to do. Jin Heck said that they needed to approach the tree from two sides simultaneously, and he moved to do as he had said. John Soo did the same thing. The tree's reaction was not long in coming, and the roots rushed towards them. Jin Heck deftly dodged the roots flying at him. But suddenly he noticed something strange. Jin Soo stood in place and sneered. He only pretended to run. He spitefully hissed through his teeth that he had decided to deceive Jin Hyuk and use him as bait. But he kept deftly dodging, and a smile also adorned his face. He too had a plan that he had already put into action. Once again he slipped past the root, and the root rushed past him straight towards John Soo. What a surprise it was for him. The smile on his face was immediately replaced by bewilderment. It was already too late to do anything. The roots had already begun to entwine his legs. Gradually, they climbed higher and higher up his body. He could only watch as Jin Heck made his way closer and closer to the tree. The roots were already entwining his face, pale with fear and turning blue from suffocation. Muffled pleas for help reached Jin Hyuk, who was smiling at his own trick. Horror and tears froze in John Soo's eyes. In his glassy eyes, one could read that he realized these were his final moments. And it immediately entwined him from toes to hair tips and squeezed with frenzied force. Not a shred of pity could be read on Jin Heck's face. He was certain that the man had gotten what he deserved. Now he could concentrate on the most important thing, the tree. Once again, it sank its roots into him. He saw that they were approaching from both the left and the right. But having understood the attack pattern, dodging was not something difficult for him. His agility was enough for the roots to fly past him and ram into the tree trunk itself. Luck, they hit its very center. A tree's heart peeked out from the hole. It was the most coveted fruit, the kernel of the mangrove tree. A smile and relief shone on the hero's face. Everything turned out to be exactly like in the game. The hero took a torn-off root of a mangrove tree and squeezed it tightly in his hand. He was determined to capture the heart of the tree. It was as if it sensed him, and with renewed vigor, it took root in him. But he was ready for it, standing in a defensive stance. Jin Heck kept his eyes fixed on the roots that were rapidly approaching him, and he parried their blows with a broken root. The roots tried to entwine and pierce him from all sides, even gathering into a huge, swift weapon, intertwining with each other. The hero's eyes were shining with excitement. He broke through further and further. The roots he was dodging were piercing and crushing the concrete floor of the market with immense force. Jin Heck was enjoying such an exciting adventure. He was getting closer and closer to the tree trunk. Suddenly, a strange glow began to appear around the tree. Thousands of dream butterflies flew out of the crown, which confused the hero. However, he knew what to do in this case, so he covered his airways with the sleeve of his jacket. Trying not to inhale the butterflies, he had almost reached his intended goal. Roots swirled around him and butterflies glowed, but he did not retreat. The final dash to the tree trunk, and before him appeared his heart, which he immediately pierced with the root that was still in his hand. Tremendous effort could be read in his sparkling eyes and tightly clenched jaw muscles. He stuck his hand in where the heart of the tree had been just recently. The shockwave from the magical forces emanating from the crack in the tree blew everything around the hero away. But he did not budge an inch. It inflamed him even more. His hair literally stood on end, and lightning bolts shot from his eyes. The tree's last strength was directed at this confrontation with Jin Hyuk. But it was all in vain. The leaves began to wither and fall right before our eyes. From the heart of the tree, a crack crept up and split it in two. Gene Heck felt relieved, and he was even a little surprised by the pop-up message that his name would be added to the honor roll. After pondering the fact that he now had to enter his name, he decided to remain anonymous. He again slipped his now free hand into the glowing magical crevice of the tree to loot what he had fought for. After rummaging around with his hand for a short while, he finally found what he was looking for and smiled with relief. In his hand was a green shimmering glass ball. He squeezed it tightly, satisfied with his victory. He looked at the orb as if he couldn't believe his luck in obtaining it, as it raised the hero's level to 4. After a brief reflection on this, he tossed it into his mouth and swallowed it. Immediately, he felt his strength increasing, which was also evidenced by the glow around him. The hero felt an incredible strength within himself. An hour later, all social networks were bursting with comments about the victory over the Tree of Greed. Everyone and their brother commented on the uploaded video evidence of the victory. Jin Heck was browsing through the comments and was surprised by the numerous commercial offers that came one after another. He thought that just a day ago, he would have agreed to the money offered without a second thought. But now he could not reveal his identity. His memories of the Tree of Greed were still fresh. He thought about all the overcome difficulties and became increasingly convinced that he should not share information about himself. The influence of the tower spread throughout the entire territory of Seoul, and this influence consisted in the fact that all the relics became real. Gene Hack decided to find out which phone contained the largest number of such relic phrases. And of course, it was the National Museum where he immediately went. He couldn't stop thinking that strong players would definitely come to the museum, not the ones that were at the Tree of Greed. Having opened the museum doors, he was taken aback. He was struck by the silence reigning in the building. Here he saw what he had in fact expected. In front of him lay the charred body of a man. Smoke was still rising from this charred body, and smouldering embers were visible. Thoughts that the world had to change occupied the hero's mind. He knew why he and all the other people were here. Everyone wanted to get their hands on the map of the first 10 floors of the tower, because knowing the terrain provided a huge advantage. He imagined how all these greedy people were reaching for the power bestowed by this map. The Hall of Relics was in complete chaos, with shattered glass, blood, and fighting people everywhere. Suddenly, there was a shout calling for everyone to stop, and people actually stopped. Though they were outraged by such a statement, a huge, pumped-up man with a rather menacing appearance was urging them to stop. An extremely outraged man with a pipe in both hands did not understand what this bodybuilder was talking about. The young man with the hammer was also puzzled as to whom he was going to intimidate. He decided that the threat should be answered with a threat. He immediately paid for it because the one who shouted at him to stop showed him his strength. His fists grew larger and turned to stone. Everyone around was puzzled as to why he already had some abilities. Meanwhile, this muscle man, already burning with rage, was demanding to be given the coveted map. Here on the horizon appeared some kind of sweet-looking old man who had no intention of agreeing with this state of affairs. The tense bodybuilder couldn't believe his eyes, wondering if the old man had completely lost his mind. Grandpa introduced himself. His name, Min Jong-woo, meant to live in friendship and brotherhood. But the bodybuilder was not in the mood for introductions. He yelled at the old man and threatened to break his neck. At first glance, an upset Min Jong-woo decided to teach the loudmouth a lesson. The old man waved his hand. A spark flashed in his changed gaze, and a fireball appeared above the hand. The frightened bodybuilder couldn't believe his eyes that the old man possessed magic. Meanwhile, Min Jong had already launched the fireball he had been holding in his hand at him. He darted towards the offender like a bright, fiery lightning, and only managed to sparkle in his eyes like a tiny spark. Here, a furious flame engulfed Kachka from head to toe, and it left him as nothing more than a charred, smoking body. A wisp of smoke swirled up from his mouth, which had been agape with astonishment only recently. The body collapsed to the ground in ashes and coals, which the old man no longer paid attention to. The girl behind him was wildly delighted by the old man's cyclical magic. Apparently, they are collaborating. She was still quite a schoolgirl, dressed in a short skirt, a shirt with a vest and a windbreaker thrown over it. However, she already had her own artifact as well, a figurine. The statuette, however, turned into a formidable Anubis, ready to tear to pieces anyone who stood in Yuri's way. The statuette itself radiated magical energy of immense power. A risen Anubis from it, a black dog with shiny golden Egyptian patterns, a huge dog 2 or 3 times larger than its owner. She understood that the power advantage was on her side. So with a sweet but sarcastic smile, she suggested that everyone present remain in their seats. The people around her were frightened. They clearly had much less strength and gaming experience. Frightened, they threw down their weapons, for which Yuri received gratitude. But someone still didn't listen to her. She heard footsteps approaching her. Stunned, everyone present stared at this madman. He did not notice them. Among the piles of garbage under his feet, he was looking for valuable relics. Found it, dusted it off. His simplicity and absurdity infuriated Yuri. The target for the attack was chosen. The formidable Anubis seemed to have flown into a rage along with her, crushing the floor to smithereens under his foot. He received an order from his mistress to destroy the fool, and immediately he rushed into battle, raising his sharp metal weapon high. However, despite the obvious threat, this fool still did not budge. The weapon was rapidly approaching the unshakable Jin Hyuk, and it was parried with what seemed like an effortless blow. The weapon of Anubis flew away. This stunned Yuri. Anubis's weapon left a huge impact mark in the form of a large crack on the floor behind Jin Hyuk. Everyone present literally opened their mouths in amazement. Pleased with himself, Jin Hyuk looked around at everyone. He mocked the puppy left without a weapon. Yuri started rummaging through her bag, from where she pulled out a few more statues. She awakened 4 more relics. Jin Hyuk made a show of surprise. Yuri stood there, angry and sweaty, not understanding why her opponent found it funny. She looked like a little kid among those huge Anubis guys. Now it will be much more interesting for Jin Hyuk to fight her. She reminded him of that old man. He had thought that there were quite a few hardcore gamers. However, Jin Hyuk's disdainful attitude depressed her even more, and he just kept provoking her. Though angry, she understood that he was bluffing. Upon hearing this, Jin Hyuk decided to teach her a lesson. Having dusted off the relic a bit better, he tossed it up and activated the ancient relic, Tiger Among the Pines. Everything around the hero burst into flames, and from behind his back appeared the head of a huge tiger, the Lord of the Mountains. Yuri was seriously frightened by this. Under the tiger's enormous paws, the floor cracked and crumbled. His glittering eyes and muscular body evoked an animalistic fear. Anubis bared his jaws. Jin Hyuk stroked the furry, vicious beast behind its ear. Now it was his turn to wave his hand and command the relic to destroy the opponent. With a menacing roar, the tiger lunged forward. The relics of Yuri also rushed at him with shouts and weapons. The tiger raised its enormous furry paw with razor-sharp, long claws, and with one blow, he cleaved the Anubis dog that rushed at him. The rest of the dogs, with a terrible grin and spears, rushed after the first one. The tiger burst into a ferocious roar, baring its predatory fangs. And at that very second, that mouth was busy with the flesh of one of the Anubis guards. He furiously tore and threw his enemies, his maw smeared with blood. The mistress of the Anubis hounds watched it all with a cold sweat on her face. Because the huge beast was already approaching her, she stared at it in horror, already imagining how she would be torn to pieces. Yuri stood before the ancient horror that had already captured her mind, and she fell on her knees before him, her eyes filled with tears. Jin Hyuk watched the girl's suffering with a grin on his face. He looked at the girl, shivering with horror, and proud of his victory, he asked to give the relic to him. The girl, still sobbing with fear, began to zip up her jacket, as if not understanding what he was talking about. Jin Hyuk leaned over the girl, demanding Tutankhamun's mask from her. She irritably snapped at him that this mask was useless in Korea. The hero beckoned his beast with his finger. Before Yuri, the tiger roared again, enveloping her with its hot breath and baring its fangs right in front of her face. She threw her bag. Tutankhamun's mask was inside it. Jin Hyuk, joyfully holding the mask in his hands, thought that he had obtained the second relic. Yuri asked him if he was hunting for the map, but Jin Hyuk had already forgotten about her in the heat of battle. He stroked his tiger and left him to watch over Yuri, who was terribly afraid of this beast. And not for nothing, because his huge muscles, sharp teeth, and burning eyes instill real horror. Jin Hyuk looked at the result of his battle, and finally he set off for what he had come here for, already anticipating the power he would soon acquire. The old man waiting for Yuri asked her what had happened, and he clearly did not expect that instead of a frail girl, the sturdy Jin Hyuk would stand next to him. Grandpa was seriously scared of a person capable of passing through Yuri, so they stood and silently gazed at the magical passage. Jin Hak shared his thoughts about what he saw, and his grandfather confirmed them. However, he said, touching the portal, that he sees such a one for the first time. Pulling his hand away, he clarified that neither physical impact nor magic helps to pass through. Jin Hak also decided to touch this portal. He really pulled himself together, concentrated on his thoughts, and he managed to push his fingers through. He figured out how this portal worked and how to destroy it. The old man was amazed by such a train of thought. Jin Hak said that Grandpa should weaken the portal with his magic until the moment he collects all the relics and gets out of the portal. The old man sighed, realizing what he would have to do. Jin Hak assured him that he would have to work with the portal from the outside, and in return, he would bring his grandfather the coveted map. The old man was not at all impressed with this state of affairs. It was a lot of trouble, and the payoff would be virtually zero if he was deceived. But Jin Hyuk promised to give back the map. With a sigh, the old man agreed. Nothing else remained for him to do. The hero touched the portal, and at that very moment, the old man applied cyclic magic to the passage to weaken it. His hands flared up and his eyes sparkled with magical power. He directed all his energy straight into the portal, illuminating everything with magical fiery flashes. And then the portal slowly began to crack as if it were glass. Jin Hak, covering his face with his hands to protect from the shards and fire, jumped through the portal. Abruptly stopping, he heard his grandfather shouting from the other side. The old man was sweating and shouting for Jin Hak to hurry up. And Jin Hak, waving his hand, promised to hurry, but in his own way. Around him were many relics. But unlike the upper floors, there were no traces of anyone else's presence. But suddenly his gaze was drawn to one shop window. Something was broken after all. Emperor Qianlong's iron sword was missing. Someone managed to open the passage, take the sword, and not get into any trouble. However, Jin Hak thought that this fool had taken some low-rank relics. And finally, he found what he was looking for himself. The coins of the Li dynasty. He squeezed them in his hand. It was what he needed to craft new perfect skills. To craft, other parts were also needed. A Persian mold for casting metal, the right eye of Tutankhamun's mask. Gene Hackman knew what he was doing. If you combine the two relics, they begin to interact. The eye sparkled and the shape filled with light. The hero knew that everything had to be paid for. So, illuminated by the light of the two relics, he took a bundle of coins in his hands. I tore that ligament and threw the coins down. The power from the interaction of the three relics gave birth to a bright light, and the energy spread around so strongly that Jin Hyuk had to cover his face. He looked at the nearly impossible but successful unification of the three relics. He received the relic of truth of the highest rank. The hero held in his hands the most powerful among the 5 existing relics of this rank. However, he came to the museum for something else. An unknown force swept him upward. He acquired a new skill. This out-of-rank skill allows him to copy and preserve various abilities, combine them and create more powerful skills. In his eyes shone an unknown power. Suddenly he heard someone calling him from the portal and turned around. The old man was holding the portal with his last strength and telling him to return. Gene Hack pondered what he needed to do to copy the old man's ability. His eyes sparkled and a task board appeared before them. He had to expose Min Jongwoo. It turns out the old man had been hiding his true emotions all his life. Gene Hack realized that he had to make Grandpa lose his temper. Min Jongwoo was holding on with his last ounce of strength, and Jin Hyuk decided to put his plan to drive his grandfather crazy into action. Turning away, he said that his grandfather's help was no longer needed. The old man did not understand what was going on. Gene Hack turned around contemptuously and said that the efforts had been in vain. Min Jong was completely lost after such a statement. Could it be that he had been deceived? In a word, Jin Hyuk broke the barrier between them, and he said that all this time, Grandpa had been wasting mana for nothing. He stopped thoughtfully right in front of the painting that Min Jong-woo wanted so badly to acquire. Without thinking twice, Gene Hackman struck a lighter, as he had absolutely no need for her. The old man was seriously frightened by such an action. His mouth gaped wide open. But Jin Hyek was relentless. He brought a lit lighter up to the map, and in an instant it was consumed by fire. Grandfather let out a pitiful cry. Before him burned that which he had sought for so long. And in the reflection of this fire stood the one who had ruined everything in the blink of an eye. Therefore a flood of swear words poured out of Grandpa. His face even turned red, and his veins bulged with anger. Gene Hack, pleased with himself, achieved what he wanted. Here a new skill shone above him, the fire element skill copied from the old man. Consumed by rage, Min Jong-woo was about to teach the scoundrel a lesson by directing his skill at him. But he didn't take one thing into account. Jin Hyek now also possessed this skill. Therefore, the old man was extremely surprised when he saw that the hands of the boy in front of him also ignited with magical fire. Min Jong was taken aback and stared at his opponent with wide eyes. Before him stood a monster that had not only stolen his skill, but also amplified it 100-fold. A cold sweat rolled down the old man's face. Jin Hyek ordered him to obey him if he was going to calmly advance through the floors of the tower. Then Jin Hyek exited the museum building. He thought about how he had seen quite a few nerds at the museum, and none of them wanted to risk their lives. How are they going to beat everyone if they are not ready to put absolutely everything on the line? Grandfather agreed to cooperate with such a strong player, and Jin Hyek ordered him and his girl to level up. Jin Hyek understood that now he had to master as many of the most powerful skills and abilities as possible, and he had to possess them alone. His thoughts were interrupted by his rumbling, hungry stomach. His gaze fell upon the nearest cafe. Upon entering, his gaze was immediately drawn to the guys discussing the latest news. Literally, all the cafe visitors crowded around the TV. The correspondent reported that many wounded and dead were carried out of the Seoul Museum, and such a bacchanalia is happening in all museums of the world. Jin Hyek mused that it was no wonder everyone rushed to get their hands on the valuable relics. And then the TV showed footage from security cameras capturing Jin Hyuk in the heat of battle with the Anubis. He heard that people around him were already recognizing him. He needed to think about a disguise. His thoughts were interrupted by a reporter talking about an association of awakened government officials who had abilities. He did not expect the state to tackle all of this so quickly. Swirling his drink in the glass, he listened with a serious expression to the association leader speaking on the television. The leader, Han Sang-jin, looked tall, but was a sturdily built adult, with a huge scar across his face. Jin Hyek had heard that government officials wanted to hire all the volunteers with abilities for quite a lot of money and good ranks. However, the most important thing for the state was to get the man from the ether. The government would agree to any of his conditions, as long as he joined the association. Everyone was unanimously amazed by the offer made to the stranger. But Jin Hyuk had his own thoughts on this matter. He was absolutely uninterested in such an offer. Han Sang-jin wanted to have a strong player as an ace up his sleeve. But why is he the head of the association? If he has a strong ability, Jin Hyuk must obtain it at all costs. The clock struck 7, and it caught the hero's attention. Every time the hour hand pointed to a new time, the Tower of Trials opened. Through the portal, the hero entered an open tower, where there were already quite a few people. He stood among them and heard their chatter. It seemed he found himself among a group of newcomers. All players received a pouch with 100 gold coins upon entering the tower. The rest of the currency they will receive from streams. Boosting was punishable. Our hero was already used to such rules. The system of streaming connects the players climbing the tower with people outside the tower. Viewers watch videos of those players whose capabilities allow them to climb the tower. And the more popular you are, the richer you are. The crowd, upon hearing these rules, moved in all directions. Jin Hyuk found himself in the crush, constantly being jostled by someone, but he himself was in no hurry. He was not going to be the one who would be the first to upload videos and share his experience with others. His gaze was directed in a completely different direction from where the crowd was running. He remembered how long he had been gathering experience on the lower floors of the tower, and there, having illuminated the ancient runes, he realized that he had been leveling up his character completely wrong. Then he had to resort to a terrible deed. Delete the character and start leveling up again. Having erased all his experience, he promised himself to definitely go all the way next time. The memories from 6 years ago were still so fresh. He thought standing before the gates to the labyrinth of the Minotaur. In this labyrinth, he could find everything he needed for initial leveling. So, not having the key, he entered the ruins. And the gate gave way. With one strong push, he opened it. Inside, everything was exactly as he remembered. The vaults, the bas-reliefs, the cracked floor, and even the psalm moths he had grown so fond of. Here he noticed that he was not alone in the maze. In front of him stood a crowd of players, ahead of which was a fragile, pretty girl. Smiling, she greeted him and said that upon seeing the open maze, she and her group also decided to go inside. 10 minutes earlier, this group of people had been standing near the maze and saw Jin-Hek open the gate without keys. And it was strange that he didn't go with everyone else, but immediately headed towards the maze. After some thought, the girl concluded that the beginning was the most important part of this game. And since even a novice had opened this labyrinth, it meant that it wasn't all that difficult there. In the group, they understood that no one would share items with them just for a thank you. That's why the girl decided to take them and forever leave the one who opened the gate in the walls of the labyrinth. And now she stood before Jin-Hek, assuring him that going through the maze would be more fun and safer in the company of others. After examining her, Jin-Hyuk saw that she had a skill useful to him called communication, which would definitely come in handy for him in the future. The guy behind Hana introduced himself. His name was Jang Cheol-sik, and he quit the game before even clearing the first floor. The others also started introducing themselves. One of the girls in the squad, Lee Hyo-min, had only reached the first floor, while the second, Jang Mi, made it to the third. The blonde guy, Chon Min-guk, has never played before. The bespectacled one, Do Guan-yu, hasn't either. Beaming with a radiant smile, Kang Jin-hyuk introduced himself as well. However, he thought that with such skills, they were more suited to be his enemies. And then unexpectedly, Park Hana snuggled up to him. Taking his hand more firmly, she asked how many floors he had climbed. Jin-Hek felt her applying her communication skills on him. That's why he quickly pushed her away from himself, dodging a precise answer. She definitely did not expect that he would manage not to fall for her skill. Therefore, smiling sweetly, she asked him to at least tell her about the peculiarities of the labyrinth and the local monsters, to which he agreed without pleasure. Standing right in the middle of the hall, Jin-Hek announced that the labyrinth periodically changes its structure. No one but Hana seemed to understand him. But at that very moment, the floor began to tremble under the feet of the entire team. The rookie guys were rushing around in horror, not understanding what they should do now and what was happening at all. Na was also horrified. How could she have miscalculated so badly? This was the maze of the first floor. The wall right in front of her began to move, threatening to crush her. With one sharp leap, she avoided this unfortunate fate. But at that moment, a concrete slab began to fall from above onto one of the team members. She collapsed with a deafening crash, sending up huge clouds of dust. Everyone, somehow exhausted, tried to recover from this calamity. Jang Cheol was angry, not understanding how such labyrinths could even exist on the first level. Mina had disappeared. Calmly brushing the dust off himself, Jin-Hek was surprised that they had not seen such labyrinths before. Frightened Hana decided it was time to leave, as it was getting too dangerous. She turned to her teammate with navigation skills. But she, with eyes full of tears and horror, said that her skill did not work here. Cold sweat appeared on Hana's downcast face. Jin-Hek only looked at their altercation with contempt. It was foolish to hope for navigation skills here. Anna became completely furious due to the hopelessness of the situation. She furiously called out to Jin-Hek. Turning to face her, he was directly accused of almost getting them all killed because of him. The rookie guys began to chime in with their leader, putting all the blame on Jin-Hyuk. But he failed to get through to their voice of reason by saying that it was not him who dragged them here in the first place. Hana was horrified that the idea was actually hers. However, the rookie guys didn't even listen to Jin-Hek, grabbing their weapons to give him a thrashing. But their plans were thwarted by a huge axe that plunged into the floor. The shockwave knocked Min-guk off his feet. Yeomin was screaming and crying with fear, while the bespectacled guy was simply looking at it all with his mouth agape. A furious giant minotaur was charging straight at them. They were able to achieve combat readiness, even though no one believed they could win. Once 10 times larger than them, the bull roared furiously, swinging his axe. Hana, having turned pale, had already resigned herself to the approaching end. Here, past their fear-petrified bodies, Jinhek rushed by. They only saw the Minotaur taking aim and swinging its huge axe at him as he ran. A second later, the axe, gripped by the bull, fell to the ground. However, Jin Hayek somehow managed to dodge by jumping over the point of impact. So while soaring through the air, he acquired a secret skill, the leap. Jinhek dodged all the Minotaur's attacks by jumping. He was sliding across the floor, while he, breathing furiously, was swinging his axe, from whose blows dust rose in columns and the floor crumbled. Each time, Jinhek tried to dodge later and later to be closer to the beast's weapon. The crew stared at him with fear and gaping mouths, not understanding why he was doing this. Nahana had no face at all. Jin Hyuk responded to the bull's furious snarl with a satisfied smile. The more he enraged the Minotaur, and now the axe was already at his throat. Jinhek dodged at the last moment, still shedding a drop of blood, for which I received an increased agility stat. But it was time to stop these stat-padding evasions, because it was getting too dangerous. Jinhek saw his companions huddling against the wall, trying to slip away from the Minotaur. Hana suggested that if they moved along the wall, sooner or later, they would find a way out, and the whole group followed her. She didn't even notice how Jinhek approached her and asked right into her ear if she was running away. Hana turned to him, her eyes wide with fear, and she froze. She saw Jinhek in front of her, calm and smiling, and behind his back, an enraged Minotaur. In a split second, he grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the spot where the frenzied beast was about to strike. Her teammates only had time to scream. Someone fell to the floor in fear and even started calling for their mother's help. Jin Hyuk kept mocking Hana, but apparently she didn't even hear him. She only looked at the bull, seething with indomitable anger, and could not move. But now, behind the Minotaur, the wall began to move, right where Jin Hyuk and Hana's team were located. The wall closed right in front of their noses, separating them from the terrifying beast. And no matter how much Minos pounded on this wall with his axe, he could no longer penetrate it so easily. Everyone tried to at least catch their breath for now. Hana did not understand why Jin Hyuk was doing this, and he, in turn, did not understand what kind of nonsense she was asking him. It was an easy catch for stats. Now they can finally rest until Minos finds them again. Hana asked hysterically how much longer they had to be there, to which she received the long-awaited answer: a whole month. She even felt sick from this. Her legs gave way. Jung Chil helped her not to fall completely. She wanted to go separately from Jinhek so that Minos would not pursue them, but this only caused him to laugh. Did they not think that a hike without a guide would be far more disastrous? Turning the knife he had picked up from the floor in his hands, Jinhek said that he knew this labyrinth better than anyone, including where the exit was. Gritting her teeth, Hana nevertheless agreed to go further with him. Just one problem: the hero, with a grin no worse than the monster's, reminded that everything comes at a price, and he brought the found blade right up to the girl's nose. His demand was to get all their money from them. Meanwhile, another fellow was valiantly fighting in the Goblin Cave, and he did not forget to stream from there. Later, while re-watching it from his laptop, he was delighted that the video was rapidly gaining popularity. His team was just as glad, their faces clearly showing the joy of the upcoming profit from such a stream. They managed to edit the video in such a way that the team-based speedrun of clearing out the Goblin Cave looked like it was done by just one guy. However, the happiness did not last long. The guy in glasses called Manhwa over to the monitor. They could not believe their eyes. The rating of their video was rapidly falling due to the newly uploaded stream. Manhwa did not believe that what was done in the new video was true at all. Without wasting any time, Jinhek sent his comrades to procure essentials, dry firewood and a place to spend the night. While they were seething with anger, he just laughed and waved at them. When they left, he also decided not to sit idly by. So he decided to settle in with the obtained gold and visit the game store. There he picked up various items that individually had no value, but he knew what he was buying, so he decided to combine them. Lucky him, he got a new relic, the Queen of Luck, the Wheel of Fortune. Here he immediately used this relic to increase his luck to 100%. Jinhei obtained 10 enhancement scrolls with an extremely low success rate. He applied them all to his blade. All 10 amplifications were successful. Now he has a new weapon, an old dagger of the highest level. While he was examining his sword, an icon appeared, indicating that his achievement would be uploaded to the list of glory. After 10 days, Jin Hyuk's teammates looked deplorable. They sat and looked at their pitiful belongings. A small campfire and a bed of moss. They were clearly starving, as the only food here was moss and disgusting mushrooms. The constant running from the Minotaur had completely worn them out. They were only interesting to Jin Hyuk with his new cool dagger. The desperate Hana tried to find at least some information about Jin Hyuk, but it was all in vain. She desperately held her head. All attempts to obtain info were a failure. Maybe at least a brother from the Raven Guild will be able to help her. She was disappointed that she would have to wait another 3 whole weeks for help. So she and Jung Chul sat and looked at Kang Jin Hyuk sleeping on the moss. The thought came to Jung Chul to kill him right here. He even picked up a stone and swung it over his head. But Hana convinced him that it was not a solution, because Jin Hyuk could dodge it. That's why she took out the stinger of a venomous bee from her purse, a single drop of whose saliva could kill as many as 100 trolls. She decided to act for sure. Seeing mushrooms for dinner yet again, Jin Hyuk was already starting to feel nauseous. Hana sarcastically told him that if he wanted to eat better, he should go and hunt. Jin Hyuk held out his bark plate to receive his portion, and with chopsticks made of bones, he put the mushroom in his mouth. Hana and Yang Chul stared at him greedily, already anticipating the taste of their poisoned victory. But then the bark plate with mushrooms fell out of Yang Chul's hands, and he began to cough up some kind of black sludge. Hana watched in horror as her partner suffocated and died an agonizing death. Poisoned, Yang Chul collapsed to the ground writhing in agony, startling Hana, who jumped up over him in fright and surprise. Jin Hyuk accused her of poisoning the food, and now there was no point in her trying to evade or make excuses. He had swapped the bowls while they weren't looking, so it was not him who ended up poisoned. He also caught her stream in the game, which was against the rules. Gritting her teeth and almost crying, Hana stared at him point blank. Without a second's delay, Jin Hyuk filed a complaint against her. A quick check did indeed reveal multiple violations by Hana, as well as violations by her friends whom she involved in watching the stream. Still reeling from these shocks, she turned around and froze in place. Right in front of her and Jin Hyuk stood Minos. Upon discovering them, he howled with rage. Hana immediately hid behind the strong and agile Jin Hyuk, who had already saved her many times from perishing in the bull's clutches. Her attempts to help her and save her were unsuccessful. Jin Hyuk was ruthless. Looking straight at her, he said that he no longer needed her, for he had already acquired the skill from her. She tried to manipulate him by saying that her brother was in a high-class guild, and that he would definitely take revenge on her behalf. But Jin Hyuk knew that he was stronger than any guild. She had not finished speaking when the Minotaur's axe smashed the floor right under her feet with his axe. Jin Hyuk masterfully had dodged this blow. He gripped his upgraded blade more tightly and decided to demonstrate in practice who should fear whom. With all his might, he struck the bull with it right on the crown of its head, so hard that it even opened its mouth wide. Without a moment's hesitation, he ran to the best position for the next strike, and the next attack was to blast Minos with a huge jet of flame, which he clearly did not expect. Weakened, the bull dropped to one knee. Jin Hyuk realized that a little more, and the beast would be defeated. Meanwhile, the Minotaur activated his final skill, Berserk, and broke into a furious roar. Minos acquired incredible powers, plus 30% to all stats, and even endowment with intellect. Jin Hyuk looked at him with determination, but Hana had no idea what to do with it and was terribly afraid. Steam billowed from Minos' nostrils. His eyes were bloodshot, and his mane fluttered behind him, a terrifying sight. Having gained the ability to speak, he vowed to smear these pathetic humans across the walls. However, this did not frighten the hero one bit. He continued to stand before the beast, clutching his magical blade. Jin Hyuk was getting more and more excited. He was becoming merrier and merrier. They engaged in battle, Kang Jin Hyuk parrying attack after attack, sparks flying from the screeching metal. The speed of the attack was frenzied, but he managed to parry them all. Anna watched this spectacle from her hiding place. It seemed insane to her that Jin Hyuk was no longer evading, but fighting with his full strength. She did not understand how he could smile in such a situation. but he took pleasure in the slow but steady increase in his stats. Suddenly, the bull made a grimace of total incomprehension. The huge boulder he had raised with his axe was split in two right in front of his nose. Jin Hyuk's pumped up strength and agility gave him unimaginable speed, so he not only managed to dodge attacks, but also landed his own powerful blows. Once again, the bull swung his fist at the hero, and the fist, not having time to reach the last few centimeters, froze. Minos fell asleep. Hana thought it was the end, but they explained to her that it was just the end of the skill, after which the animal went into hibernation for a day. They still had a long way to go, with 20 more days to spend together. And all these 20 days passed like one. Jin Hyuk leveled up his stats, Minos attacked them. Over those 20 days, the skill had been honed to perfection. And now, the bull posed absolutely no threat whatsoever. The more furious he became, the more Jin Hyuk raised his stats, and this rage was never enough to catch up with him. In another battle, Minos' face was severely contorted. Jin Hyuk landed an unexpected blow right on his jaw, knocking out the huge bull. Finally, he overcame him. Now it was time to deal with Hana, which seriously frightened her. Upon hearing the news that Jin Hyuk was recruiting interns, she was surprised. She was ready to give anything just to become an intern, and Jin Hyuk was not going to miss this opportunity, intimidating the girl by looming over her. Not knowing what else she could offer him, she hysterically decided to give away the most valuable thing, the Ring of Brahm. She clung to his leg and sobbed, just so he would take her. And he did take it, but he said that it was necessary to make a deal, though not on paper. Having combined the skills of communication and fire magic, he gained a new one, the Seal of Destruction. Grabbing her by the shoulder, he was going to brand her. At last, the open gates appeared, leading out of this dangerous labyrinth. Finally sitting down on the grass and feeling the sunlight, Hana was able to relax. How glad she was that she was awarded 5,000 coins for completing the maze. But the happiness did not last long. Jin Hyuk demanded all the coins from her. This saddened Hana, yet it brought him joy. The only thing left was to bring him the ring in 2 days, and this duty was reminded to her by the brand, his hand right across her entire face. According to the news, one of the guilds is going to defeat the third-floor boss very soon. Jin Hyuk's face darkened at the news. Wasn't the Korean guild rushing things a bit too much? He thought about the fact that they wanted to get a lot of resources, but his memories of this floor were still fresh. And did they want to pay with their lives for the resources they had obtained? Having made it home, the first thing he did was take a shower. And then he decided to write to his old gaming friends, trusted informants. The meeting was scheduled at a cafe. Imagine Jin Hyuk's surprise, for his friends in real life were nothing like their in-game characters. He was glad that they still got along quite well. How ashamed he became of his old nickname when they introduced themselves to each other. His friends were so radiant, Tae-min couldn't stop smiling. Yanhua also supported the general good mood. Finally, he met people he felt comfortable with, he thought. Sitting with them at the table, Tae-min was surprised that Jin Hyuk had not taken the special test yet. His mouth gaped open. He knew nothing about any test. They took a taxi and went to the tower to take the test. While they were riding in the car, his friends told him that the test was introduced for passing to the second floor of the tower, because the number of novice deaths there had increased sharply. Those who passed the tests were assigned a confirmation code tattooed on their wrist. Jin Hyuk immediately thought that the head of the association was simply gathering people with powerful abilities in this way, which he decided to turn to his advantage. After the association was created, players with high ratings immediately started receiving offers from the best guilds. Therefore, 3 types of people gathered at the testing site. Those who want to obtain the right to enter the tower, reporters and those who meet these players, and those who want to show their right to enter to the whole world. Only after entering the testing zone did Jin Hyuk and his friends witness the scene of security guards clearing crowds of people in front of high-level players. However, Jin Hyuk had no intention of moving out of the way. Parker Jin ran up to the fight. Pointing his finger at Jin Hyuk, he demanded that they give way. After scanning with his relic, Jin Hyuk saw that to copy the abilities of this ruffian, he needed to provoke him. Hana, Park Ha's sister, looked with horror at the impending quarrel. Her brother kept yelling and pointing his finger. That's why Jin Hyuk grabbed him by that finger and turned it until it clicked. More precisely, he broke it. While Parkour was shouting and swearing, Jin Hyuk calmly drank water. Parkour was about to hit him, but he got a splash of water right in his face. It cooled his ardor. With a sharp leap, he wanted to knock Jin Hyuk to the floor, but miscalculated, not expecting such speed of movement. Therefore, he flopped pitifully onto the floor in front of the audience. Kim Gi-tae, a huge man with a very high level and a world-famous celebrity, approached the noise. He tried to rein in Jin Hyuk, but the latter was brazenly rude to him. Having rather indelicately reminded them of their shady ginseng supply dealings, what also infuriated Gi-tae. Suddenly, black walls began to appear around him. The dungeon skill. The rest only watched what was happening with bated breath. Jin Hyuk demanded 10 dungeons from Gi-tae in exchange for information. Ginseng, which they had discussed before, had the wonderful property of restoring energy, but it had an unpleasant debuff, magical poisoning. With this debuff, 3 items could help to cope, one of them being a mandrake root, and Jin Hyuk knew where to get it. Gi-tae was stunned because his words matched the intelligence data. Frightened, he decided to intimidate Jin Hyuk by pressing the blade against his face. The price of 10 dungeons was too high, and this outraged Gi-tae. But Jin Hyuk was not only unafraid, he grinned predatorily at his rival, causing the latter to be bewildered. Threatening with his blade, he said that both the deal and Gi-tae's life were in his hands. Meanwhile, a fight was also brewing outside the dungeon. But she abruptly stopped when the dungeon fell apart and those two came out of there. Jin Hyuk immediately tried to reassure his friends that everything was fine and under control. However, all this did not give Parkour peace. He wanted revenge. What made Gi-tae even more furious was that, in a fit of anger, he grabbed the rude shorty by the throat. Choking either from anger or from the hand on his throat, Parkour mumbled that he understood everything. Gi-tae threw him on the floor like some kind of rug and left without looking back. Parkour was seething at being treated like this. Pleased with himself and having acquired his skill, Jin Hyuk also left. He entered the room where the test was to take place. There were several crystals of various sizes. The intern said to start as soon as he's ready. He was immediately struck by the fact that ordinary players could not even activate a mid-level stone. Jin Hyuk swung his blade with all his might and activated the power leap, and he split the crystal in half. He remained lying on the stand, smoking from the magical powers invested in him. The intern had no idea that such a thing was even possible, and wanted to urgently report everything to the authorities. Jin Hyuk first politely requested that the authorities should be informed about this incident and the high rank only after a week. But after cornering the intern, I threatened him a little with my blade and got him to agree to my terms. At the exit from the internship, Jin Hyuk was met by Hana, who gave him the promised ring. After that, Hana demanded to remove the stigma from her, but Jin Hyuk didn't give a damn about her requests. His friends met him on the street and inquired about his rank. How surprised they were by the lie about the lowest rank he had received. They expected something completely different. As they put him in the taxi, they reminded him that there was also a second test that had to be taken in the tower. The test itself consisted of going through one of the tower's dungeons, and the difficulty could be chosen arbitrarily, even a dungeon with orcs and goblins. But Jin Hyuk had completely different plans. He was going to go to the ancient ruins located on the first floor. For 11 years of the game, and even now, when it already exists in reality, no one has been able to pass this forbidden zone. Having packed all the things he needed into a huge backpack, he was thrown onto the first floor of the tower, into the abode of the fallen. He was the one in the mountain ruins, a wondrous place with many cliffs and waterfalls. He was not here alone, because having the lowest rank, he was not allowed to be admitted there by himself. One of the team of people gathered there asked Jin Hyuk how he even got here in the first place. The answer was obvious. Money was needed, which the stranger agreed with. Smiling, he showed Jin Hyuk his phone, the screen displaying a photograph of his family, as if to say he was here only for them. Jin Hyuk assured him that there was no need to worry. Everyone returns unharmed from where they are heading. Finally, the whole group reached the ruins, where they were supposed to wait for the raid party. A window appeared in front of Jin Hyuk, displaying special rewards for the first conqueror of the tower. He acquired 2 skills: Cold Heart, maintaining composure in critical situations; Monopolization, the highest reward for a quest if it is completed alone. He figured that getting any of the rewards in the tower was a special stroke of luck, so the new skills suited him perfectly. Suddenly, the square where they all stood was illuminated by a bright light in which the silhouettes of people could be seen. Mages emerged from the light, a raid group, with a group leader at the forefront. Everyone except Jin Hyuk was staring at them with their mouths agape. Son Jong-hwan, the group leader, looked like a serious soldier in his steel armor. To acquire his skills, one first had to gain his trust. Jin Hak understood how difficult it would be for him to gain trust. However, he was very surprised that the head of one of the best guilds had such a low level. Under the leadership of one of the mages with a staff, they made their way deeper into the ruins. It was already getting dark, and the mage activated his staff to light the way for everyone. A huge hall was visible, completely strewn with monsters killed by the raid group. Novices, clutching their backpacks tighter, examined the frightening scene that opened up before them. Jin Hek looked at the raid group and couldn't understand how they hadn't suffered any losses, even though they had killed so many monsters. He was shoved from behind and yelled at not to forget his duties as a porter. But what else could he expect with the lowest rank? Jinheku had to help the foreigners. They stood in gilded, gleaming armor. An idea came to his mind to get acquainted with someone. So, without thinking twice, he approached one of the knights in armor and offered a glass of ice water. The knight took off his helmet, and underneath it was a blonde girl of wondrous beauty. She was of aristocratic descent, possessed many skills, and was one of the most famous players in Europe. He was looking at her while she was drinking and thinking that obviously the raid group had no losses with her. Jin Hek decided to check her target status and what was required to copy her skills. It was necessary to save her. Smiling at him, she held out the empty glass. If only I could get a patronage of heaven ability. But to do that, I need to save her. The most difficult conditions. Suddenly, there was a commotion. The guild leader looked extremely alarmed. In front of him lay the dead sentries. Someone activated the ruined security system, a dormant bomb. The head could only throw up his hands in despair. The bomb was in combat mode. Now he faced a difficult choice. Evacuate the civilians and lose his primacy in the guild, or engage in battle. Having taken all the responsibility upon himself, he decided to fight. To fight, relying on St. Teresa. Among the rest of the guild members, a rumor had already spread that the guardians of the ruins had awakened. Some archer standing a little distance from everyone shouted that everything was under control, if they listened to the leader. But then a huge iron hand of a guard appeared out of the darkness above him. In an instant, he was gone. He died right before the eyes of his guildmates. Their small group was surrounded by guards. The guild leader was giving out orders, telling some to move forward and others to take up the rear flanks. Disorganized newcomers were getting lost and gathering slowly. However, the first line of defense had already been built thanks to the commander. The mage activated the distribution of buffs. They didn't have to wait for the guards' attack. The hall immediately erupted with a clang of weapons against shields. Solo players were increasingly being squeezed, and they were asking for reinforcements. Other mages also insisted that solo players needed support, but the leader wouldn't listen, because there would be casualties anyway. Solo players were already in despair. They realized that they had been abandoned, surrounded by sentries. They were sobbing, seeing their imminent doom. But St. Teresa came to their aid. With a few powerful blows, she scattered all the guards. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed that the guards had already broken through to the non-combat parts of the ruins, where the weak players were. In the rear guard, almost no one remained alive. The man who came here for his family pressed himself against the wall, accepting his death with a smile. But Jin Hyuk had promised him that he would return home. With his blade, he chopped the guard in front of the head of the family into small pieces. A second guard was also approaching him, but Jin Hyuk was not lacking in agility. He dodged the blow and, while turning, used his fire magic. The second guard was defeated. There was no longer a threat in the camp. Out of nowhere, Teresa appeared, and in an instant dragged the head of the family away from the clueless Jin Hyuk. She declared to him that there was no need for ordinary workers to threaten with weapons, and that apparently it was he who had awakened the guards. Now he was under arrest. She wanted to take him hostage, but he kept dodging, and she was afraid of hurting him. She was so angry that she didn't hear Jin Hyuk's excuses at all. Having dodged her attacks once again, He knocked her to the ground. Only with the blade at her nose did she finally hear him. The father of the family also ran up, saying that Jin Hyuk had actually saved him. Instantly realizing everything, she stood up and started bowing an apology. Since both he and Jin Hyuk needed rare items located in the same place, he proposed forming an alliance with Teresa. However, the leader had completely different plans for Teresa. He did not want to let her go. Having haggled for his rights, the leader nevertheless agreed to let Teresa go before the battle with the final boss. She agreed to his terms, and with puppy dog eyes, she pleaded with him to take one porter with them. The porters, completely frightened, did not want to go with her to certain death. But Jin Hek volunteered. They tried their best to dissuade him, but he was adamant. He also put on a show that he's doing it out of great love. The porters fell for it, the questions dropped away, and Teresa and Jin Hek left. Having reached the right place, they saw that the sarcophagus they needed was under magical protection. Unexpectedly for both of them, a warning popped up. The tower boss was watching them. Teresa thought the boss had seen them as enemies, but Jin Hek convinced her that he had simply recognized him. Since Jin Hyuk said he knew a way to get through this place, Teresa asked what she needed to do. From the balcony, their observation post, Teresa jumped down right into the thick of the monsters and instantly drew their attention to herself. She activated the battle song skill, which increased all her stats by a factor of 3. Her task was to draw all the monsters' attention to herself. Having activated her sacred power, she became the center of everyone's attention, and she entered into battle with all these creatures that were swarming upon her in huge crowds. Meanwhile, Jin Hek was running straight over their heads towards the sarcophagus. But then his eyes rounded with surprise. He saw an elite undead creature, a magic skeleton. He will be glad to fight the mini-boss. But then, out of nowhere, the guards appeared. Fighting several opponents is quite difficult, especially when the Lich uses black lightning. But Jin Hek manages. Gradually, he made his way to the sarcophagus, avoiding all the lightning bolts, and destroyed his magical protection. Jin Hek finished off the remaining guards with his enhanced blade. Meanwhile, Teresa had almost dealt with the remaining monsters, far from the sarcophagus. As soon as Jin Hek approached the skeleton, its skull split in two, and before him appeared a swordsman, pointing his sword directly at the hero. The swordsman said that he should have been remembered, but Jin Hek did not recognize him. With the help of the Eye of Truth, he finally established Chon Yu-sun's identity, and everything fell into place. He was the one who was in the museum back then, and stole the sword from there. Jin Hyuk remembered Yoseong, because after defeating him once, Yoseong began to pursue Jin Hyuk and constantly challenge him. The realization that this damn stalker was in front of him did not bring an ounce of pleasure. And again, that guy tagged along with Jin Hyuk, only to lose. What a clingy person. Pointing his sword at the hero, he craved revenge, for they were now at the beginning of the journey and equal in stats. Jin Hyuk was certainly not against it, but he reminded that he was not alone here, and Teresa would always come to his aid, so there would be no fair fight. Plunging his sword into the ground, Yoseong used field selection. Having retrieved what he wanted from the sarcophagus, Jin Hek managed to hear Teresa calling out to him, and he disappeared, leaving her alone. Yoseong and Jin Hek found themselves on a pristine created battlefield. Yoseong activated Duel, which gave him a 10% boost to all stats, and Jin Hyuk got a debuff that reduces all stats by 10%. He understood how much it had weakened him. The fight would be unfair. Due to the extremely unfavorable situation for the player in the game, special conditions were applied, which allowed Jin Hyuk to copy Yoseong's Song of the Sword ability in advance. Now his body will automatically use sword fighting techniques, and also enhance his perception. Yoseong went on the offensive, and Jin Hyuk had to grab his blade. He parried all incoming attacks. Yoseong did not understand why he only used a dagger at medium range, but smiling and reflecting all attacks, Jin Hyuk had enough with just a dagger. The opponent realized that he was clearly being underestimated, which made him terribly angry. Therefore, he used his skill of contactless combat, Sword Soul. Jin Hyuk noticed that these were slightly unfair techniques in a fight with a novice. What he was sent for. What a rookie he is. Having paid attention to the dagger, he saw that he would not be able to parry attacks with it for much longer. It would break, So the time had come to merge the relics. He took out the one he had pulled from the sarcophagus, the demon's soul, and rubbed it into his dagger. Now he has a unique ability, the Graveyard of Swords. When activated, skills are enhanced by 500%, and the body uses the most essential techniques. Jin-Hak felt the power that he had acquired, but he could not activate it due to a lack of mana. Yusong could not understand how it was possible that he could not win on his own field, and in an environment unfamiliar to his opponent. He recalled how in the game, he went out of his way to win, even angrily breaking the VR headset. Enraged, he intensified his attacks, but Jin-Hak still parried all of them and kept getting closer and closer. Using his inhuman speed, he appeared behind his opponent's back and already raised the blade above him. But now Yusong has parried this. However, it cost him his sword being knocked out of his hands. Now it was all over. The sword plunged into the arena floor with a clang, and Yusong fell to one knee, acknowledging his defeat. Now he was begging for death. He was tired of losing every time. Jin-Hyuk spared him, saying that he was a worthy opponent and that he should keep improving himself. Having praised his perseverance, he offered him his hand. However, apart from nobility, Jin-Hyuk had his own motives for copying skills. It was useful to have a strong player as an ally. After that, the arena field was destroyed, and Yusong finally asked for his opponent's name. Jin-Hyuk did not respond, and forever remained a stinker on Yu Seon's lips. Teresa, upon hearing all this, quietly giggled while Jin-Hyuk irritably gritted his teeth. Meanwhile, the leader and his raid group moved further and further. Suddenly, the leader's assistant saw on the display that one more enemy was approaching them. Here, a huge iron golem appeared before them, on which the supreme vampire was. He slowly glided down to the ground in front of the raid group and bowed. Several swords were immediately pressed against his neck. The vampire, however, came with the news that he had been sent by the dungeon boss. And now, cutting his finger on one of the swords, he asked everyone present to go with him. His blood spilled all over the floor and enveloped the poor people. And if they don't agree, then half will go with him, and he will eat the other half.